Hello, good afternoon. This is Genealogy for Beginners using FamilySearch.org. This is our fourth class. Got one more left next week. Organizing, documenting, and forms. Well, I am taking another course starting next week from the Family Tree group. It's going to be on documenting and citations and whatnot. So I think I'm going to save that till next week. So we're going to do forms cubed, forms, and more forms, just because they do get us into some additional kinds of records. Going in to Family Search, you at that top of the menu, which is not showing here, once you have logged into Family Search, one of the things to get to forms and information as to how to search, that kind of good thing, is to go into the Wiki. And there was, when you click on search on that first entry page, when you log in, if you click on search, a drop-down menu comes up, and it does give you the last item, I think is or second to last, is the research wiki. And so we clicked on that, and this is our wiki home for starting. Actually, this one is not. This is actually the research resources. And we will be coming back to this form, but wanted to make a couple notes here. These two, guided research and search resources, can be really helpful. Then here, research tools is also good to know about. This is your contents. It will take you, these are your links to further down on the page. So we talked a little bit about this last week, genealogy research process, more research tips. Anyway, we've got Danielle logged in. You can tell she is logged in because we have her name up here in the right-hand corner. You guys are familiar with all that. What we want to do today, organizing and citations and forms. I am starting a class on Monday that's specifically on citations and organizing, that kind of thing, from the Family Tree University. So I decided that we'll wait and we'll do that part next week. So today we're going to be forms cubed, or forms, and more forms. I'm Renee and
Danielle.
We're going for it. We got one more week left. Today we're looking at forms. So how we're going to get there. I clicked on search, and where I want to go is Research Wiki. How do I know this? Because this is what we were kind of doing last week. So we get Research Wiki, and it's going to take us there. Here we go. Amazing Research Wiki, humongo, exciting information. This thing is, just sitting down, you could read this thing and learn so much. Family Search is so good for teaching you how to use a resource and how to do genealogy. We've got guided research here, and we've got research resources. This is where we're headed. So click on research resources. And here we go, sort of a basic page. These are your contents. We were playing around with some of this last time. Beginning genealogy, videos, blah, blah, blah. Research tools, which if we click there, it'll take us down to this little guy. So research tools, and here we are. Outlines, forms, census records, and so on and so on and so forth. We are going to go to research forms. And here we have genealogy research forms. So here we go on genealogy research forms. Okay, this is one thing that's kind of interesting. There's National Archives, there's archives.com, there's ancestry.com. Now, some of these, this is obviously free, this is government. For this, I do know this is a pay. Genealogy Bank also is a subscription. Here's censuses, that's just generic. Hey, we'll talk about censuses toward the end of today. Cindy's List, that's just an amazing one, which I think I'll click on just now so you can quickly see it. There's also Bailey's Free Genealogy Forms and Family Tree Magazine. You're going to be able to find all kinds of forms in all kinds of places. This is just a quick and dirty in terms of how Family Search lets us look them up, but they too don't just use their forms. They obviously will let us use all kinds of other people's forms. Cindy's List is an amazing, and they've specifically here looking at charts and forms, but honest to goodness, Cindy's List has like the mega list of online genealogy resources. It is astounding. So it just gives you some additional forms. We will go back this way. So from here, this is where I scroll down. Family Search, this shows you what we've got in Family Search. You've got worksheets, census worksheets, British records, Canada. one of the trivia about Canadian census. Now these are worksheets, okay, and I can just show you in a minute for the US, but just a comment about interesting things that you can learn. My third great grandfather was Augustin. He was a wood shoemaker in Canada. And the 1851 census of Canada asks, has anybody passed away in the 12 months preceding this census? And sure enough, in the margin, because I didn't have a death date for him, I barely found a baptismal certificate for him. In the margin was a death date and cause of death. Found out he died in 1851 early in the year, and it was from cholera. And he was like, I don't know, 52 or something. That now has me really intrigued. So nice to know I now have a date of death for him, but it is from, while it's a government document, it's not a vital record because it's not specifically birth, death, or marriage certificate. So anyway, so that's just one of those weird things that you can find and you never know. Then we have US censuses. Now, bear in mind, these are worksheets. We'll get to that more later, but just a quick mention, 1850 is the first census. So worksheet, this is like a way you can transcribe what you're gonna see when you actually look at a census image or look at the census microfilm image. It gives you the areas you can write it so you can actually read it. 1850 census, important thing to know about that. That's the first census where you actually have names in the household, not just the whole head of household's name, ages, sex, color, occupation, all those, that detailed information that in the other censuses from 1790 and every 10 years through 1940. And the questions are different through the years, but 18 through 1840, they're just tally marks. We'll get to that in a bit. So anyway, census good stuff. Remember, 72 years before the detailed data gets released. So in 2022, we will see the detailed data for the 1950 census. More about censuses in a moment. You got family groups, pedigrees, and research logs, and family group record format. And notice the important thing to bear in mind on this one. This is Family Search's link to their forms and whatnot that they've got linked, obviously, to theirs. For example, family group record form, boom, it actually has some things that specifically would be relevant for the LDS church. So this might be, if you're not with the church, you might not want to use this particular form, or you can still use it, not a problem. Other family guides, which we'll get to in a minute. Pedigree chart forms, interactive PDF that you can complete before printing. Remember, a pedigree form is also called an ancestry chart. And we kind of talked about this last week. Oh yeah. And, talking about making things somewhat bigger. Once again, you've got these you can fill in. So if we're going to do Danielle, just, there we go. Whoops, I'm going to type her name in funny. Oh, that's okay. And so on and so forth. So just know that this is one where you can actually type it all in, save it, and that's really cool. Or print it out. Yep, it's just kind of cool. And let's see, research log. This isn't really the way I came. I just threw a slide from last week. And same thing though, you can tell by the blue boxes that you could type information in. We will show you another research log to show you how people can fill it in, another form. Just important to know anytime you're filling, and this is to keep track of your research. It's not like putting any kind of familiar relationships. This is just say I was researching Jose Vicente Gutierrez Espiricueta. My objective to document his life. Okay, so research log, keeping track of what you've looked at. There's so many different ways you can get into things, and I'm going to just scroll down. National Archives and Records Administration. Again, you've got, and these are actual census forms, but they too are, it's not the form in the actual one, like if I had a copy of the form that they filled out when they were doing the inquiries in 1850, this gives you the information, but the actual format, so you can tell microfilm series, it's not like looking at the image, but all of the information's there. So this is basically, I call these a worksheet.
So you can see what you're going to be seeing on the actual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Record.
And it's a way to make it legible. Yeah. The other thing, in terms of, yeah, I'm thinking we can make it bigger. The other thing that's interesting, important to note, and this also I think we mentioned last week or maybe the week before, when you're consulting whatever resource, don't fix the names.
Right.
Everything that you see, dates, names, places, however, spellings, transcribe it. Don't change it. So if it's, there was one family, Del Barrio family out of Duval County that I'd been working on, and the first census I think that they had their daughter in was the 1870 census, and for whatever reason they had her name as Arteaga. Well, her name was Adelaida, and I have tons of proof of that, but sure enough, on that census, it's spelled Arteaga. So what did I put in my little form, my worksheet? I put it just like I found it. So just bear that in mind when you're playing with these things. So just know that really these are the worksheets, but they look like what they have the information that the forms would have had. Something interesting, you've got some other additional censuses, which we'll talk a little about. Slave schedules and censuses, there's just a whole bunch of different kinds of censuses. So these are your population censuses, and then there's some that we'll talk about in a second, the non-population forms. 1850, 1860, they did have slave schedules. The 1850 census for this area, Cameron, Starr, and Webb counties, the 3 counties, I don't recall having seen anybody listed for Laredo that had any slaves. I think Duval County and for sure, but that wasn't in Cameron and Starr and Webb. But I know that in one of those counties there were slaves. And so it's kind of sad. I want to say I figured this out because I never looked at a slave schedule until maybe about 5 some odd years ago. And I was floored because it really drove home the fact that these people were looked at as not people, but property. We know that from history, but to see it enumerated in 1850 in Texas, in South Texas, was just like, because they're all anonymous. You've only got the name of the slave owner and the number of slaves, the age, the sex, the color, and his ranges from like black to, mulatto, even though we think of mulattoes as being a mix, not necessarily color. I haven't played around with fugitives from the state and how many have been manumitted and that. And I think I must have been looking at the 1860 census because I don't recall these questions being on it. But just so you know, and the sad thing is, no names, this is slave owner, not name of slave. So there's some definite challenges for those people that are going to be doing research on Afro-American history. But because the world has so many other kinds of documents, you never know what you're going to be able to find. There's whole classes on that, by the way, too. And I suspect that there's probably something in Family Search focusing on the Afro-American genealogy I have, and Native American as well, because here are 1900 and 1910 inquiries relating to Indians. So a supplementary schedule. And did I mention that I didn't show them the early one? No. Yeah. Okay. So this is this would be like what you would see in the censuses that don't have before the 1850. Because remember, 1850 is the one with the name of all the people in the household. All you're going to see in these early censuses from 1793, 1840 is a head of family. There's not going to be any mention of the names of the family members. You'll see tally marks, like literally not a number, but tally marks under the ages. And then obviously free white females, all other persons, and slaves. So it is interesting that you can again take some of the information. If you knew you had a birth certificate on somebody, one of the kids, and of course you knew what the father's name was, then you could look it up on the census and say, oh, okay, and kind of figure it that it's possible that that's whatever child was marked down. They had like one son or however many. So it's kind of interesting, but kind of frustrating at times as well. Non-population census forms can be really interesting. Agricultural, basically, and notice the time frames on these during the 1800s and were really growing. So it can be really fascinating for especially South Texas to see who's got land and how many sheep or goats they were raising and how many acres, all kinds of good stuff. the value of the land. Industrial manufacturers, I haven't played that much with. Mortality and morbidity, though, I have, and can be useful for finding death information on people. I have to say that I was not, when I found these, because I didn't really know that much about the morbidity and mortality schedule, I was very frustrated going back to the Del Barrio family. They'd had Adelaida and her brother Alfredo were the two oldest. Then there was a Dolores and a Felix. And I knew their dates of birth and where they were born because of a notebook that their father had kept. But I didn't know when they died, and I had this feeling they died as children because I also had a bunch of photos from 1884, and two of those photos, one was a Dolores and one was a Felix, but it was apparent that the Dolores was maybe 4 years old and the Felix was slightly younger, like maybe 2 years old. So I'm like, okay, obviously the first Dolores and Felix passed away. Couldn't find anything on them anywhere, drive me crazy. I finally found some reference in an immigration record, or not immigration, a manifest, ship's manifest. Because in 1875, the family took a trip from the US to Europe, and I'm gonna guess they went to visit Felix Benito del Barrio's parents in Spain, or at least his family members in Spain. And they sailed in steerage, and they had, which of course is like below decks, and they had all 4 kids with them. And I want to say that the 2 littler ones were probably 3 or 4 and a baby. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe they died on the way back or something. I mean, maybe they got sick. Well, didn't find anything, could never confirm. So one day I just was fed up, had like 10 minutes, end of the workday. And I said, I wonder. So I went in, and this was actually Ancestry, but I could do the same thing, I believe, on Family Search. And I just searched for Dolores. And I saw that there was, no, I didn't see the census. I just said, in this database, I'm searching for Dolores, no last name, but I did put years like 1880 through 1885. And that was it. I mean, in Duval County, San Diego, I was so fed up. And sure enough, it did bring up little Dolores. And what had happened was over here on the left-hand side where name of the person that's deceased, all of the pages had been bound so tightly that the column for family number was in the binding, and then same with the last name of the person of deceased. So all they had were the first names. Well, good news, bad news. I found Dolores and I found Felix, and I found another child, which in the 1900 census, I knew that Pilarita was the mom, Pilarita Perez signed. We knew she'd had a child. I can't remember the full family, but in the 1900 census, they asked, how many kids have you had and how many are still living? So from that, I'm like, oh, there's one kid I don't know about. And sure enough, here in the mortality schedule, I found out they had a little baby named Alfonso. So what was really sad, I did find out, death, cause of death. There was evidently a smallpox epidemic, since we're talking, pandemics and epidemics these days. But it wasn't the big one of 1899 where Laredo had the big riot. This one, there's some notes about it in the San Antonio paper, but San Antonio said, just a case, not too big. We're not seeing any more. Only to find out, as you started looking through this, Camargo had a horrible epidemic of measles that year and started in the fall. And so that area, you've got families crossing back and forth. And it was amazing. Out of like 128 children, out of 128 records, actually, the majority were children under the age of 10, and they all died from smallpox. One of the cool things, though, I did learn, and this one really got me crazed, and someday I'll try to track him down. There was a black man, and they did say black, they didn't say Negro. And he was 100, and cause of death, old age. I loved it. So I have no idea why he was in Duval County at that time. I mean, that meant the guy would have been like born in 1780 or something. You're like, whoa. Anyway, so little side stories here. So mortality schedule is one of the other kinds of censuses you'll find. I've never worked with the defective dependent delinquent classes. Immigration forms. quick comment about immigration forms and ship manifest and whatnot. Remember that I believe it was last time we were talking about vital records, and vital records being records of birth, marriage, and death, the ones that you really, really, really want to find. And you could find public or private, public being from the government, and private being, say, like from the church or a private corporation or something. So immigration forms are going to be not a vital document, but you might find some information that would be useful in terms of birth and whatnot, place of birth. But you would also, they are government, so they're public documents. Whereas ship manifest is in the private category because those were usually held by the ship's company or whatever, steamship liners. So just so you know, think about that. Military forms, government, draft registration. What's cool about the draft registration, and I don't know here, I know, let's see, there's Form A, and this is just me being curious. Okay, in conjunction with this data sheet, one asks for the guys, if they're older guy. Okay, these ones look like they were just different dates. But it is interesting because I think both in World War I and in World War II, there's actually what you would expect the registration age bracket to be, like, 18 through 20, whatever. But they also had like the old guys signing up. So I found that really fascinating. In World War II, my grandpère, my father's father, he didn't fight in World War I, but he was in the military. His brother, though, fought over in France. He was among the Canadian troops that were sent over. But going back to grandpère, by the time World War II came, he's living in the United States. And so while you see the registration for his sons, son singular, and a daughter, you then see his registration as an older guy. You're like, okay, interesting. I guess they were just trying to keep track of people if they needed them. Then you also see there's archives.com. Here's Ancestry. Again, they talk about it. Here's our for-pay subscription, surname, Census Forms. Genealogy Bank is another one. I have different feelings. I think I have a lot of memberships to various things, and I just haven't. Ancestry and Family Search are like my go-tos. They're really, really, really good. Love them. And now there's a lot of linkages, like Ancestry uses Family Search for many things, and it'll show you if it's a record they've gotten from Family Search, little note. And some of the other ones, I want to say Genealogy Bank is one of them. My Heritage is another. So there's a lot that overlap, but because they're subscription services, they all ask you to pay something. Then I've never played with Bailey's free genealogy forms. Let me see, where's my, there it is. There's the, so that would be something that you could play with. Cindy's List, remember, we just were talking about that as something that we talked about last week, is an amazing website. Cemetery Forms, Family Tree Magazine, more. So these are resources, different forms from different databases, which is great. I know what I was going to do. This is the other thing I was going to do. You don't have to just follow the little menu things. You could do it the easy way and just go over here to the Family Search, the Wiki search box, and just type in forms. And that's great. I type it in correctly. Good. My little words or my glasses. And bingo. And it's going to bring up what's in the wiki. So it's going to say, okay, hey, here's US Census Forms. Here's use appropriate forms, which is actually where we're going to go. Danish Genealogy World List, you end up seeing all the various forms that Family Search has connections with. This one, even though it says Genealogy Research Forms, this one directs you to the Baileys. Now, as we're looking at some countries there, American Indian and Puerto Rico, Durham, research logs, and Spanish. This is what I wanted to show you. This is not specific, even though if you go, well, I'll just show you. We go to Spanish genealogy forms. It's really just the forms, but in Spanish. So if I'm looking at a group sheet, bingo. The words are, the language. So the format in terms of, or the information asked, could be the very same. It's not that, it's just in Spanish. And to be honest, let me think of something I hadn't looked at. If
it even has the
Padre de, see, and so there are, and actually I was thinking it's good because it does give you mom and dad, and that's where you can get the names in. Had I already mentioned the 4 names when you're putting names down in this one. I know I did. If I hadn't already mentioned it, remember that when you are putting people's names in, okay, so you've got the man's name, the father's name, and the mother's name. Well, in Mexico, of course, you see the two last names. So with my husband's grandfather, it was Jose Vicente Gutierrez Espericueta. Well, his grandmother, and Jose Vicente was married 3 times. The first woman died shortly after childbirth. I mean, the baby lived for a little while, but not much, more than a couple months. And then the second wife was the mystery wife. That's the one we talked about last week with the matrimonio and the presentación. And that was Maria Jimenez. Oh, this was related to family group sheets. So when we come back to family group sheets. Oh, which is here, family group sheets. And then the third wife was Josefina Arredondo. So if I'm thinking of, if I really want to make sure I get all the names, because they say put your the mother's maiden name. Well, just remember, and it's a cool thing, but it can get kind of confusing, but it blows in terms of finding more resources. My example would be my mother-in-law, Gloria Genoveva Ramos Vigil. And Ramos was her father's last name. And actually it's Ramos Villalobos, but that's getting really, and then her mother's last name was Vigil. When you see that in your records, make sure you transcribe that, or put it in your charts, your family group sheets. So that's, gosh, oh, we have a Spanish pedigree chart too. See, so there you go. You can put and this one is one where you can actually fill it in too, also online. So it's just nice to know that if you decide you want to do them in Spanish, thank you.
Or if you have somebody that doesn't know English,
that too.
It's a good alternative.
That too, absolutely. Now, I'm going to back here for a second. Notice how we have Spanish.
I have a question, Renee.
Yeah.
They're fillable, but are they savable, or is it just like the PDF?
Yeah, you can save them. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might have you asked to save as a save as copy. So it might not let you save the original with it. You would save it as, and then save it with your fillable information.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can print them out as blank, or you can fill them out and save them and then print them out. So yes, indeed. As far as I know, any of the PDFs forms that are in Family Search can be done like that. Here, we had Spanish genealogical forms and basic Spanish genealogical forms and charts. Kind of go back one. Now notice it's kind of weird. This says Spanish genealogical forms and basic Spanish genealogical forms and charts. Well, linked to the same place. I was thinking it was going to be something different, but nope, same place. And so it's just they have them worded like that. But anyway, it's nice to have. And they have obviously a number of different languages. Forms, and then boom, and then so here we go. And so here we go. The thing I wanted to go to, use appropriate forms. So that's where I decided to go, because it looked like we had the important forms just looking here. Use appropriate forms. All right, well, this is where we came kind of last week. We had the family group records, the pedigree charts, and preparing a log and a research assessment form, and then suggestions for recording information. So I think what I'm going to do first is go all the way down to the suggestions for recording information. Things to pay attention to. Danielle and I were talking a little bit. These are really good suggestions. It's not like it's written in stone. Should you choose, I mean, if you were doing your genealogy for one of the family groups, like say Daughters of the Republic of Texas or something, yeah, you'd want to know exactly what you're doing, be like pro genealogist. If you're really doing this for your heart and your kids who are going to follow you or family's going to follow you, you don't, it's a matter of preference. The only thing that you really, really, really need to do is up here, be consistent in the way you write it. So even if you choose not to follow one of these forms in terms of an actual form and how it's laid out, just make sure the information is always consistent. Any of you, and I'm thinking Vicky right now, because I know she's a busy lady, and I know Ms. DeYano also has had plenty of time in school in terms of citations, and that consistency is the name of the game. So even if you choose not to cite using a format like MLA or APA or whatever form you use, make sure it's consistent. You put all the good, important information. Names, write them in the order that they are spoken. So first name, a middle name, and then the last name or the two names. I have in mind, except for I have to go back and do it in Family Search, But in my ancestry, I have capitalized the surname and that, and then of course we talked about the maiden names for women. And so that does seem to be a standard genealogy convention, capitalizing the last name. Date, day, month, and complete year. So those of you who are used to writing this format, I know Mexican, this is what I was taught when I took Spanish class, is the format. You can use abbreviations on the month. Don't just write numbers, because in this case, you're looking at 6850. You're like, okay, is it 6th of August? Is it 8th of June? Is it 1750, 1850? So stick with this and it will be a big help. And then places. This one is the one I probably am not as consistent on. I do tend to be consistent in the order, smallest to largest. So you've got town, parish or township, county, province or district, then state, then nation last. Something I hadn't done, and I probably won't change it because it's just me right now who's really looking at these. She or he, the author, is saying don't use abbreviations, and it can be confusing. I hadn't thought about it because I wasn't thinking the worldwide. But for example, WA, to us, we think Washington State, but others, if you were from Australia, you'd be thinking Western Australia. Just something to think about. I wouldn't have thought about that. The other thing, researchers use native spelling. She's using the example of Bavaria and Bayern, Munich and Munich. So I've been lazy. I haven't. But if there's only one way to spell it, I mean, a lot of the French Canadian ways, places, that's it. There's no like anglicized version. I'm going to family group record. So it talks to you about what you're going to find. We can click on this and it'll show us, but I think this is one you can fill out. And as I mentioned, Mr. Jose Vicente Gutierrez Espiricueta, birth dates, and you're going to have this for each of his families, which means wife number 1, Rosario, I think was her first name. So you'll have Jose Vicente and then his wife, the poor little boy that was born, and that information. And then family 1, family 2 would be the one with the mysterious Maria Jimenez, because he did have children with her. And obviously you probably would want a family chart just if they hadn't had kids as well, because that was his family. It was a legal binding group. And then the third one, which had Josefina Arredondo, would be the third form. So you'd actually have 3 family group records for Jose Vicente Espiricueta. And we talked a little bit about this last time, the parents' names. Remember, and this is wife, marriage information for some reason is under the husband, and then the kids. And this one, I believe, will show us another page. Continuing on the back, depending on how large your family is. Also, too, on this particular sheet, because they do vary depending on which entity's putting out that family group sheet, other marriages. So you can put on there, and then you could make a note, please see other form you want to call it. That's our family group record. But what's fun is we've got pedigree charts. Again, we saw them last week. Some of this is specific to the LDS. So this might not be one that you personally would want to use unless you were a member of the church and that was important to you, or is important to you. This is one pedigree chart. So yeah, basically pedigree chart, ancestor chart. Research log, your research log. Now these can be useful. Organized, yes, definitely important. And I'm gonna go over here before going here. Research logs, you could just keep your notebook or whatever. And so once again, or a spreadsheet.
Or digital.
Yeah, whatever works for you. But things that it helps you keep your research organized and keep focus on your subject, your objective for that particular person. Documenting facts, we'll see an example in a moment. Again, write things down literally across them. And then again, when you're looking at your various sources, make sure you get the standard author, title, publication, publisher, date of publication, anything, volume numbers, anything that's going to help you go back and track it down again, or help somebody who's following you, because nothing's worse than getting a resource written down and then realizing that your information's incomplete or just plain old missing, and you're like, oh, where did I find this? So always be thinking Hansel and Gretel, leave breadcrumbs. Make sure they're solid enough that you can track them down. So we looked at this one here, which is, this is just the form, a research log. Again, many different kinds of forms on research log. You'll see another one, but this is one that you could fill out and then save. Then the other one I like just because it shows real life. Yeah, here we go. This guy, so much fun. Obviously, research log. Mr. G. David Diltz was filling this out. He's the researcher, and it's for William Fraser. But you see all kinds of fun things that he wrote down. This is a call that he had made, and he was evidently looking for information on Robert. And then he writes down information here about the call, says what his results are. Notice that it's important, or at least it's important, to say what you don't find. So important, I was mentioning information that if you find nothing, make sure you make a note of it. If you have interesting symbols, I have no idea if those are specific to genealogy or not, because I'm not there. And then things that his question and some additional suggestions for future research. So obviously this guy was keeping track of what he was doing when he researched what. A lot of times there'll be a column that says where, like geographically, where were you? Print out or use a research assessment form just as something to show you. I've never used one, and I guess because I've never felt like I've gotten that far, or I've used other notes. So just know that it exists. I wanted to look at the census records, and this actually is a specific site on the census, and it talks about the different places that you can find things. It wasn't really what I was looking for, but that's okay. See, it just shows you there's so many ways you can get to information here that it's really, it just screams at you, please search me. Please just play with me for, a few hours. I've just jumped out of family search real fast because I want to mention some things about the censuses because they're just so fun. Actually, what I did earlier was just play with census history, because you could just go to the United States Census Bureau page and look for history and whatnot. But look, there's a pull down item for genealogy, and you've got decennial census records. So it talks about the 72 year. To see, National Archives actually has information on the census as well. So now we're just going to click over that direction. And census records, here we are at National Archives. Then they give you information. So see, there's so many places you can go for information on the same kind of record. So just another, and again, it talks about the various kinds of censuses, how you can search them. It's just, there's information everywhere. The censuses can be super cool, lots of stuff, lots of ways to get into them. So anyway, so here we're back. I call it done and open it up for questions. So